Welcome to Cleary & Co Solicitors. Today's video is about grievance procedures and constructive dismissal. If you feel you've been dismissed by your employer, there are a number of posts on our website about unfair dismissal and constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal is where you've had to resign. There are many claims for constructive dismissal wherein the applicant does not succeed, as they did not avail of all the grievance procedures before resignation. It is understandable the employee's emotional reluctance to partaking in the grievance procedures, as many consider the employer will not listen. But we would say it is nevertheless an imperative procedural requirement for the employee to follow and activate all grievance procedures before leaving. If grievance procedures are availed of by an employee before resignation who then takes a claim for constructive dismissal, this can increase the strength of their case greatly. This video should give you a further explanation of this point. The termination by the employee of his contract of employment with his employer, whether prior notice of the termination was or was not given to the employer in circumstances in which, because of conduct of the employee was or would have been entitled, or it was or would have been reasonable for the employee to terminate the contract of employment without giving prior notice of the termination to the employer. So, in other words, it is the employee, not the employer, who makes and activates the decision to terminate or end their own employment with their employer. The employee has decided enough is enough regarding their employer's conduct, and it is time to move on. Now, what generally happens in these cases is that, say, Mr. X has been fed up with working for the employer for a while, but Mr. X has a family and bills to pay, and just puts the head down and decides to stick it out. This is until Mr. X can't take it anymore and says enough is enough, and nothing is worth what he has to put up with at work. This hypothetical employee then makes the decision to leave with haste, before invoking any of the grievance procedures the employer has. After notifying the employer they are handing in their notice, they then attend with a solicitor as they are justifiably aggrieved at the employer's conduct. The solicitor then advises them one option is to take legal action for constructive dismissal. However, this type of action is not to be commenced lightly. We would say that approximately 90% of clients do not attend with us for advice prior to making the decision to leave the employer in constructive dismissal actions. What generally occurs is that they leave the employment after being at home for a short time. It is then a person attends with their solicitor. To succeed in a constructive dismissal action is considerably harder than succeeding in legal action where the employer dismisses the employee, i.e. an unfair dismissal action. Grievance procedures should be availed of by the employee before leaving the workplace. In constructive dismissal actions, the onus of proof is on the former employee to prove the case. The complainant must satisfy either of the following two tests. 1. The contract test. If the employer is guilty of conduct which is significant breach going to the root of the contract of employment, or which shows that the employer no longer intends to be bound by one or more of the essential terms of the contract, then the employee is entitled to treat himself as discharged from any other performance. Or the reasonable test. The reasonable test assesses the conduct of the employer and whether it conducts himself or his affairs so unreasonably that the employee cannot fairly be expected to put up with it any longer. If so, the employee is justified in leaving. The second test is the more common of the two. The employee seeks to satisfy successfully. A difficulty in constructive dismissal actions is that the conduct of the employee is also assessed objectively. An employee must show that he/she has no other option but to resign. The burden of proof on employees in these cases is very heavy. An employee must show not only that they acted reasonably, but also that they availed of each and every internal mechanism or grievance procedure to resolve the dispute prior to leaving the place of employment. The employee must also shine a light on the employer's conduct to prove that it was so unreasonable that it is clear the employee just couldn't put up with it any longer. It is a very difficult defence to beat when an employer says and can prove that the employee did not activate the internal grievance procedures prior to taking the resignation step. The employee must be able to prove that they pursued their grievance through the procedures laid down in the employment contract before resigning their position. There is an exception to the rule, but it is a very small window to avail of. In a nutshell, any employee who's aggrieved at the conduct of their employer and knows themselves it is getting to the point where they just can't take it anymore should avail of each and every internal grievance procedure before resigning. Then, an employee is in a stronger position when it comes to succeeding in a constructive dismissal legal action. It can be unfair. An employer can argue they didn't know the issues an employee had when it is obvious to anyone with open eyes, but if an employee would just go through with the steps written in the grievance procedure, it would make their life easier with this claim. Frequently asked questions. What is the compensation for constructive dismissal in Ireland? Maximum compensation one can obtain in a successful constructive dismissal claim is 104 weeks remuneration. How do I make a claim for constructive dismissal? One can make a claim by completing and submitting an application form, which can be located on the Workplace Relations Commission website. Disclaimer: please be advised that the mentioned material in this video is intended as an overview and as a broad outline of the topic discussed. It should not be considered as the complete and comprehensive legal advice, nor act as an appropriate substitute. Legal advice should be sought from a solicitor prior to relying on anything in this video. Due care has been taken in the publication of this video, and we do not accept legal liability as a result of reliance on any material covered in the above video. This video was brought to you by Clearing Coast Solicitors.